Okay, Peter, it's a pleasure to have you here. And you're here in the context of a workshop that we organized on nihilism and the Anthropocene. We have had some really nice discussions over the last few days, and I just wanted to ask you a few follow-up questions. In the workshop, we discussed at length your book on freedom, Technology, Capital, Medium, a book from 2016. But there is a previous book of yours, a book that was translated into English as Freedom to Fail, that I want to bring into the discussion of your book on freedom. So the first thing I'd like to ask you, if you can expand a little bit on the notion that shows up in Freedom to Fail, but it is of course also very active on freedom, is the notion of what you call the crisis of contemporary philosophy. Can you talk a bit about that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Alberto, and thank you to have me here. One thing, at first, the concept of crisis, it's, as we know, it's a medical term, and it's the decision whether the ill, the sick person gets back his health or he dies. So that's the ultimate understanding of crisis. Today, I would perhaps not use anymore this term, because I guess that we have to say that the term of crisis is in itself in a crisis. So we use this term so frequently for everything that we that this use actually shows the problem, namely that we have forgotten what a crisis really is. And what I would say as a attempt to explain this crisis of the crisis is that we are living in a to say that, like I said, in a post-secular epoch, in a post-secular society. Religion had always the power to show to us what actually crisis means, what really a crisis is. And I guess that the background of this explanation of this crisis was that religion showed us that, well, the choice between good and evil is such a deep choice that if you choose, for instance, evil, you have to count with some consequences. So this maybe even with hell. So the crisis of religion in this sense is the crisis of the crisis, and therefore we actually should gain back this more original understanding of crisis. So why crisis of contemporary philosophy? Because I guess that the reality of contemporary philosophy is so, meanwhile, so rooted in the academic system, in institutions, that we have forgotten, what we could say, the freedom of thinking, that an anarchic understanding of thinking is, in this institutional framework, impossible, and that we have to win it back. Like I said, we have to win it. We have to win back this kind of anarchic freedom to also, for instance, to fail.
All right. In your book, you say a couple of times that thinking is a life. Thinking is not a vocation. That there are many other professional fields that could be inspired or organized around the notion of vocation, but that thinking philosophy is something else. Um, so, of course, I mean, you have already pointed out that the crisis of philosophy is also the crisis of the university. Can there be thinking outside the university today, and what would it look like?
Whether the remark that philosophy is not a vocation probably is the same like I have to ask you. It's the same like philosophy is not a profession. Yeah. Well, it's interesting to say that philosophy is life, that philosophy is living, that thinking is living, because you could pose the question, what does it mean? Is when we think, are we living in this situation? And when we live, are we really thinking? Or maybe we have to say that at first sight there is a huge difference between them. But what I think is, or what I've thought of, is that philosophy has the power and has the strength, the force to take over life and to form a certain life. Well, this life probably then has to do with a certain rhythm of theory and praxis of one could say of life and thinking. But I guess that true philosophy can only happen if you are willing to for a certain life form which is shaped by philosophy. Well, and that of course is not, well, it could be of course realized in institutions, but the how can I say that, bureaucratic and technocratic character of our institutions, of the actual institutions, are in this sense not open for this kind of free life.
For you, the notion of errancy is important. It is connected to philosophical life in ways that are complex and difficult. And in fact, you do associate the notion of errancy to the notion of failure. The very title of your book, Freedom to Fail, connects what you have called anarchic freedom to an ongoing possibility of failure. How do you think about that connection between failure and the philosophical life?
Well, if you understand philosophy as a style of life, or as a certain form of life, we cannot, I guess, think that philosophy is striving for what, for instance, Hegel and others called a system. Philosophy is, in this respect, an open form and an open figure of thought. It strives also for this openness, to unfold itself in this openness. And if philosophy becomes, in this sense, one could say, kind of an experience, or even that it has an experimental character in this way, failure cannot be excluded. But of course, failure in a quite deep sense, in a deeper sense, namely that you really can say things, or you really can come to things which are in a way critical concerning, for instance, ethical standpoints, moral attitudes, and so on. And moreover, I would say that if you really take philosophizing seriously, and philosophizing has this range to form your own life, you really have to accept also your, I would say, personal failures in this context. I guess it's a kind of schizophrenia to think that your personal failing in life, for instance, can be held free from the question how you are able to philosophize your life. So in this sense, I would even think that the concept of failure really touches also personal catastrophes.
When you mention personal catastrophes, are you thinking about traumatic experiences or something else?
Can be also traumatic experiences, but traumatic experiences you experience presuppose a certain passivity. That's of course, this is also, for instance, in the context of thrownness, that I would stick to this Heideggerian term, that our life, is thrown. It is characterized by a certain passivity. But I would also say that, for instance, our responsibility concerning the other is at stake here. So we can fail in this responsibility, and that is not, at first sight, a traumatic experience.
When you talk about responsibility concerning the other, do you have politics in mind? Do you have ethics in mind? Or do you have something completely different in mind?
Well, it can be, of course. It depends. It depends on the incident, of course. But I would say that maybe the deepest responsibility is located in a certain intimacy again in the relation to yourself. Intimacy in this sense that opens up a certain pre-political or proto-political even responsibility, which will have had a significance in political life, but in this situation of this intimate experience of responsibility, it is in this way a kind of preparation for that.
I suppose a preparation and a condition for that both, what you're calling proto-political is what I have tried to name infra-politics in some of my own writing. And then both of them, your thoughts, if I follow the trend, is also connected to something you mentioned at some point in your book, when you say that somebody engaged in thinking, somebody engaged in a life of thought, or in thought as life, should give it all they got, or they should give it up. So that's an interesting position. Either you do it or you don't. No half measures. I think this is also connected to your notion of intimacy, philosophical intimacy. But that seems contrary to everything we do in the academy today, where we're always very careful to follow trends, hegemonies, ways of thinking that may make your own speech hearable, visible to others. Isn't there a contradiction between a philosophical life in which you give it everything you have, and a philosophical life in which you are particularly attentive to the thoughts of those others who surround you, and who might want to orient your thought?
Well, at first to say yes, all that I know now of your concept of intrapolitics you are obviously dealing with for a long time, I will try to I would try to see a connection between this proto-political intimacy and this project. What we need, I guess, is or what we all need if we decide ourselves for philosophy is in a way a rupture not only with our personal lives, but also a rupture in the sense of, well, not only the philosophical being in the world, but the being in the world of philosophy. And this rupture as an opening of a certain space of freedom, this rupture can only be realized if we are willing to, at least for a moment, to let everything go. Everything is at stake in this situation, and like I said before, also the personal flaws and failures. But this can, of course, also be connected with other voices. That's not impossible. You know, of course, if I am responsible, I am giving responses to other voices, and I interact in this sense with other voices. But this has to be then a very, well, how can I say that? Yeah, I would try. I would dare to use this word. This would be then a very authentic relation to this voice, and this voice, well, it's another question. Who is the owner of this voice? But yeah, I guess that this is not necessarily a contradiction. This opening and the appearance of a voice.
Do you think the very notion of voice is connected to a form of witnessing in every case? Is the philosophical life a witnessing life?
By the way, of course, I know the Derrida's concept of phonocentrism, and I know that this is not. It's not. One could really talk longer about this concept of voice, or what is meant with that. What was
witnessing, the
witnessing,
connection between
yeah, of course, I would say that if philosophy is shaping your life, or is at least meant to shape your life, whether it really does is another question. Then it becomes a kind of witnessing for something, maybe even more as for philosophy. You know that the first two witnesses we know, in at least in the Western context of the history of the spirit, are Socrates and Jesus. They call themselves martyrs, and you can say that Socrates is a witness for, but both in a way are witnesses for the good, for the idea of the good, and both failed in front of a court, in front of a trial. So in this sense, yeah, witnessing transcends probably only the philosophical context to another context, whatever we call it.
Well, I know that you have been involved, heavily involved with the issue of autobiography. And so I wonder whether there is a connection between witnessing and autobiography along the lines that you were just following a minute ago. And my question then would be whether the philosophical life can be adequately understood as an autographic life, or whether precisely what matters in a philosophical life is what exceeds autography, what exceeds autobiography.
Yeah. Well, at first we have this great texts in philosophy which are autobiographies, like the Confessiones of Saint Augustine, or the Confession of Rousseau or Ecce Homo, or even the memoirs of Salomon Maimon, the important philosopher, Jewish philosopher of the Enlightenment. Yeah, so of course, philosophy touches your autobiography if you understand philosophy in this self-critical significance we talked about, and of course, in this autobiography, then witnessing becomes a very important, how can I say that, action or whatever, activity. But it's interesting, the question whether you can witness for yourself in autobiography. So presupposed you are the writer of your own, what is necessary for an autobiography. So if you are the writer of your life, can you be the witness of your own life? I guess that's, by the way, the experience you have by writing about your own life. You are, in a way, I know that's problematic, but you have to be oriented to a certain truth. If you lose that in writing about your life, it can be, or it will be at any cost be then an auto-fictional text. Fiction belongs to that, but nevertheless, even if fiction belongs to your own, to witnessing for your own life, in your own life, truth cannot be totally excluded, because then you can write everything about your life. Then it is not an autobiography anymore. Yeah. So I guess that this is a very interesting question, whether it is possible to think that you witness for yourself. The other thing is that I guess that in the process of writing autobiographical or autographical, you will at one point make the experience that the the self disappears, that your life and what happened in it becomes so present that the term of selfhood, the term of subject, is destructed in this process. And that's, I would say, because you see